Hello and welcome to another video which shows you how to get top grades at GCSE even if you're not on those grades at the minute. So in the video there are 11 things that I can teach you. I'm actually going to skip the first 3, so that means there are 8 skills that you need to master this question. And actually the last 5 which I have for you here are the ones that are going to propel you to get above a grade 6. So I'm going to show you how to find a complex sentence and write about it, how to comment on the effect of contrast or juxtaposition, which will always be in any question that you get, excuse me, how to relate the quotations to the writer's purpose, using tentative language like perhaps, and finally, something that students find really liberating when they get the hang of it, how not to write in P paragraphs so that you get even higher grades. And you do that simply by embedding quotations. So what I've just shown you and the extract I'm just about to read all come from my guide. But don't worry, you don't have to buy the guide. I'm giving you this video here for free. So this comes from Heart of Darkness, and it's about slavery. A slight clinking behind me made me turn my head. 6 black men advanced in a file, toiling up the path. They walked erect and slow, balancing small baskets full of earth on their heads, and the clink kept time with their footsteps. Black rags were wound round their loins, and the short ends behind waggled to and fro like tails. I could see every rib. The joints of their limbs were like knots in a rope. Each had an iron collar on his neck, and all were connected together with a chain whose bites swung between them, rhythmically clinking. So my first claim to you at the beginning of the video was that you will always be able to write about a complex sentence. This one is full of them. The one that stands out is this long one here. And the complex sentence, I would tell you, is nearly always, I think 99% of the time, going to be in a list. So you should always write about that. So in my guide, I explain it like this. You will always be able to write about the effect of the complex sentence. And that's actually in the mark scheme. The examiners now say you don't have to write about a complex sentence. But I still think it's a good idea to do that because it is in the mark scheme, and if you do it well, you will distinguish yourself from other candidates. So here again we have the long complex sentence in a list. Here we suspect the writer is horrified at the treatment of the black men. Again, Conrad uses the senses, especially sound, to emphasize the presence of the metal chains that enslave the men. Here it is again. Hopefully you spotted all the alliteration that was in here that creates that sound. Okay, well, let's now look at a written answer. And this comes from Alessia Chips, who's posted this answer on my YouTube channel. And what I promise in the guide is if you try any of the practice questions, I'll mark them for you. So she's tried the practice question on the Heart of Darkness extract that we've just read. Conrad uses a long, complex sentence to heighten the horror he's witnessed and create a vivid picture in the mind of the reader of the overwhelming cruelty the slaves are being subject of. It should be to. But you can see that she's gone straight in with the complex sentence in order to prove to the examiner she's covering everything in the mark scheme. And her points make absolute sense. It is the cruelty of the treatment of the slaves which is being highlighted. Now she links the effect on the reader to the writer's purpose. The listing builds up a sense of discomfort for the reader, which reflects Conrad's discomfort at being testimony of such gruesomeness. It should be to such gruesomeness, but the examiner won't mind that. Now Alessia starts to zoom in on individual words in the list. The nouns collar and tails create a semantic field of animal-like physique and treatment. Collars are often used on animals, e.g. dogs, to tame them. The slaves are hence portrayed as animalistic, so inferior, perhaps powerless, and by this Conrad could be trying to expose the harsh, inhuman treatment the slaves are experiencing to his readership. So, remember I said use tentative language like perhaps? Well, she has done here with could. That replaces the perhaps. She is embedding quotations, single words that are embedded into the answer, and that gives your answer much more fluency. It sounds much more like the writing of an expert in language. Next, you want to think about the author's purpose, and the easiest way to do that is to remember a phrase like this. Conrad could be trying to, and just put the author's name in there, and then you're always writing about the author's purpose. What makes this such a skilled paragraph as well is that Alessia has many more than one purpose. So it's to portray the slaves as animalistic, which is therefore to portray them as inferior, which is therefore to portray them as powerless. And why does he do that? Well, he wants to expose the reader to the inhuman treatment. So that's what a really developed answer looks like. Then Alessia continues, in addition, the reader is effectively made to sympathise with Conrad's horror through synesthesia of sight and sound. The simile, like knots in a rope, pictures a clearer, more familiar image for the reader than perhaps the joints. It also makes the men look inhuman, a symbol of slavery. Furthermore, the clinking of chains highlights the inhuman sound of the slaves, dehumanizing them, and thus emphasizing the writer's purpose to expose such hideous treatments and their effects on the men. So what I love about this is that she's come back to the writer's purpose again. If I highlight that, what you'll see is these hideous treatments refer to what she said earlier. The previous paragraph also include this reference to the harsh inhuman treatment. In other words, Alessia's paragraphs go in an order because she's building an argument. She's linking her paragraphs together. My other advice was that there will nearly always be some synesthesia of some sort, some reference to sight and sound, mention it. I also said name each technique, which she's clearly done here, adding in the idea that it's a simile. And she's also looking at everything for its symbolic value. And when you talk about things working as symbols, that always that always supports your argument about what the writer's purpose is. And again, she keeps using the author's name to remind you and to remind herself that it's the purpose she has to write about. Now she finishes with, lastly, the adverb rhythmically suggests a routine of sound that is never disrupted, which might be, there's that tentative language again, like perhaps, mirroring the cycle of slavery men are the cause and subject of. Conrad's purpose, there it is again, could be to expose the horrors of slavery, a call for action from the reader. So that's a perfect answer up to there. She goes beyond perfect with this further explanation here. Or maybe make a tyrant reflect on his actions when reading the book. As here, slaves are a construct for all slaves, not only Conrad's ones. Okay, so she's suggesting that Conrad has a purpose beyond the actual book. That is a perfect answer, but she's still not finished. Okay, this teaches you how to go beyond 100%. Now, some teachers gave me a bit of abuse on Twitter for claiming that my guide would teach you to get beyond 100% because obviously the exam stops at full marks. But really, that's daft. My point is, if I can teach you to do even better than the exam, then setting yourself a target of getting full marks isn't stupid. It actually is possible. I say that. Different examiners disagree. Every examiner disagrees on the marks between one question and another. And therefore, in practice, I've no idea how many people actually do get 100%. But obviously, you only need probably only 90% in order to get the very top grade. So here we go. However, he might also be aware of how he, too, is powerless against this never-ending cycle. So that's really sophisticated idea. The writer recognises that he can protest about slavery, but actually his protest might not make a difference. As his words might express his anger, but not break any chains, due to his small role in society. And this is reflected in the extract by how the clink of chains is reminded of throughout without ever being disrupted. That's really clever idea, this idea of the chains recurring like a chorus or a motif. And that proves to this reader, to Alessia, that perhaps the writer feels that he can't actually change the attitude to slavery. Now I'm going to end with that most liberating skill of not having to use P, paragraphs. So what you should notice is that this is one sentence, but it does all the job of P. So let's have a look at that. However, he might also be aware of how he too is powerless. That's the point. Against the never-ending cycle. That's part of the point and part of the explanation. As his words might express his anger, explanation, but not break any chains. Explanation again with the embedded quotation, which is the evidence. Due to his small role in society, again that's part of the explanation. And this is reflected in the extract, now we're looking at evidence again, by how the clink, evidence again, of chains is reminded of throughout, that's explanation, without ever being disrupted, explanation. So she's got all the elements of P in here. She's got point, evidence and explanation, but what she hasn't done is separated these out into long clunky sentences. By putting it all into one skillful sentence, she sounds much more articulate, but also uses far fewer words. So for you as a student, it's much more liberating to write like this because you can write much more quickly. And as you found with Alessia here, in her exam time, she's been able to write this whole paragraph extra beyond 100% in the same time limit than someone would use by explaining it in more words using P. Okay, if we go back up to the previous paragraph, you'll see that again, this paragraph is one sentence long. How cool is that? Imagine being able to write this way. Well, it's not that hard. You just have to practice. I'm going to leave this as the last screen for you as a model for you yourself to look at it and think, right, which parts are the point, which part are the evidence, which part is the explanation, and how does Alessia do it? And then try it yourself. If you like to post your own paragraphs, please do. And I'll have a look at them if I've got time, and if they're as awesome as this, I'll definitely make you a video. And then finally, let's go back and see the things that I told you I would teach you. Test yourself on these now, please, to work out if you have learnt them. It's no good just watching the video and hope that it's all sunk in. Actually test yourself. Go back to the paragraphs that you've seen, freeze the screen, and see if you can spot where she's doing these things, because that is how to get 100%. Well, if you are new to my channel, thank you very much for joining me, and please consider subscribing. If you're an existing subscriber, please give me any of your work below for other students to learn from, and as I said earlier, if it's good, I will make a video. Thank you very much for watching. Good luck with your revision, and see you soon.